When a storm blocks every road, is it only the weather or the last chance to ask yourself, are you marrying for need or for want? The morning bell at Millfield's depot rang 6 times through the white wall of snow that had been falling since midnight. Clara Hennessy stood at the platform's edge, her new wool coat buttoned to her throat, watching the stage road disappear under drifts that reached the telegraph poles. The coat, deep blue with brass military buttons, had cost her $3 at Kowalski's Dry Goods, more than she earned in a week teaching school, but she'd needed something that would last through whatever came next. No stage today, Miss Hennessy. Otto Brennan, the depot master, emerged from his office with frost clinging to his moustache. Wire from Cheyenne says the pass is blocked solid, nothing moving until this breaks. Clara's fingers found the marriage certificate folded in her coat pocket, the paper still stiff with newness, though she'd carried it for 3 days now. When might that be? Could be hours, could be days. Otto glanced at the low grey sky. Storms got more in her yet. She turned back toward Main Street, her boots crunching through snow that had already covered the morning's wagon tracks. The coat held the cold at bay as she made her way to Kowalski's store, where yellow lamplight promised warmth. A bell jingled as she stepped inside, bringing the scent of snow and wool into air thick with the smell of leather and coffee. Clara. Mary Kowalski looked up from her ledger. Still here? I thought you'd be on the morning stage. Storm has other plans. Clara unwound her scarf, noting how the coat's weight settled on her shoulders like steady hands. Might I wait here? I'll help with whatever needs doing. Mary's eyes softened. She was Polish, had come west with her husband 5 years ago, spoke 3 languages but trusted none of them completely. Always room for helping hands. Inventory needs counting bolts of cloth in the back room. Clara hung her coat on the peg beside the potbelly stove and rolled up her sleeves. The back room smelled of wool and cotton, bolts stacked floor to ceiling in neat rows. She pulled out her teaching tablet and began tallying. Numbers had always been her refuge. Clean, orderly, indifferent to the messy business of hearts and hopes. That coat suits you, Mary called from the front. Makes you look like someone who knows where she's going. Clara touched the brass button at her throat. The coat's previous owner had been a widow, Mary had mentioned, selling belongings before heading back east to live with family. Clara wondered what winters the coat had witnessed, what storms it had weathered. The depot bell rang the half-hour. Clara counted cloth and tried not to think about James Garrett's last letter, which had arrived a week ago with $40 for her passage and a single line. The house is ready. Come when you can. She'd read it a dozen times, searching for warmth in the stark words, finding only the practical kindness of a man who needed help and could pay for it. By 10, the town moved in the muffled rhythm of storm blacksmith sparks against white, neighbors bent to their chores. You're James? He's a good man? Mary asked, during a lull between customers. Clara paused in her counting. Pastor Webb speaks well of him. Says he's steady. Owns clear title to 300 acres. That's not what I asked. The marriage certificate seemed to grow heavier in Clara's coat pocket. She'd asked herself the same question every day for 3 weeks, ever since she'd signed the papers in Pastor Webb's parlor with James's proxy signature already dry on the page. Good was different from kind, steady was different from warm, and clear title said nothing about the man who held it. I suppose I'll find out, Clara said. The door chimed again as Mrs. Chen entered, shaking snow from her dark cloak. She ran the laundry behind Main Street, had come from California with the railroad crews, spoke little English but understood everything. She nodded to Clara and approached the counter with a careful smile. Soap, she said to Mary, holding up 2 fingers. Mary reached for the yellow bars on the high shelf. Mrs. Chen paid with exact change, counting coins from a small leather purse. As she turned to leave, her eyes met Clara's. You wait for stage? Mrs. Chen asked. Yes. To Laramie, Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. Waiting is hard work. But storm ends. Always ends. After she left, Clara returned to her counting, with Mrs. Chen's words echoing in her mind. The coat hung by the stove, its brass buttons catching the lamplight like small promises. Through the window, she could see the depot where Otto Brennan checked his watch every few minutes, waiting for word from the telegraph. At noon, the storm broke like held breath, 20 minutes of silence before the wind returned with sharper teeth. Clara went back inside, hung up her coat, and returned to counting cloth, waiting for the storm to spend itself and her new life to begin. By 2 o'clock, the telegraph key had fallen silent. Clara watched Otto Brennan shake his head at the brass instrument, then reach for his coat. The wires were down somewhere between Millfield and Cheyenne, cutting the town's last link to the outside world. "Nothing more today," Otto announced to the handful of people gathered in Kowalski's store. "Lines are down, stage routes blocked, and this storm's got plenty left to give." Clara fingered the marriage certificate in her coat pocket. Each hour of delay meant another night in the boarding house. Another 75 cents she couldn't spare. James's $40 would stretch only so far. "You could wire ahead tomorrow," Mary suggested, but Clara shook her head. "No point worrying him. I'll arrive when I arrive." The afternoon brought a steady stream of townspeople seeking supplies and warmth. Clara helped Mary measure ribbon and count buttons, her mind divided between the simple tasks and the complicated future waiting beyond the storm. She taught herself to be practical about marriage. It was a partnership, a contract, a mutual solving of problems, rather than the romantic fever described in the novels her students sometimes smuggled into class. Around 3:30, Dr. Morrison pushed through the door, his black bag dusted with snow. "Mary, I need whatever you have for bandages. Clean cloth, anything that'll serve." "What's happened?" Mary moved quickly toward the medical supplies. "Mining accident up at the Broken Creek claim. Cave-in trapped 2 men, they got them out, but one's cut up bad. I'll need to operate, and my supplies are running low." Clara looked up from the bolt of cotton sheeting she'd been measuring. "Doctor, I could help. I've assisted with injuries at the school children's cuts and broken bones." Dr. Morrison studied her with tired eyes. "Can you follow instructions without fainting?" "I can." "Then put on that coat and come along. Mary, send whatever clean cloth you can spare to my office." The wind hit Clara like a physical blow as she stepped outside. The coat's wool held firm against the cold, its weight a comfort as she bent into the storm. "Doctor!" Morrison led the way down Main Street, both of them using the storefronts to navigate through snow that had drifted waist-deep in places. His office occupied the ground floor of the Millfield Hotel, a single large room with examining table, medicine cabinet, and a pot-bellied stove that glowed red-hot. The injured miner lay on the table, his face grey with pain and blood loss. His partner, a grizzled man with worried eyes, paced near the window. "Hold this." Dr. Morrison pressed a bottle of laudanum into Clara's hands. "Count 20 drops into that glass of water when I tell you." Clara had never seen a wound so deep a jagged cut across the man's ribs where falling timber had caught him. But her hands stayed steady as she counted drops and handed instruments, her mind focused on the doctor's quiet instructions. The coat hung on a chair nearby, its brass buttons catching the lamplight like steady eyes. "Good," Dr. Morrison murmured as he worked. "Very good. You've done this before. Not surgery. But I've patched up plenty of schoolyard accidents. Children and miners not so different when they're hurt and scared." The operation took 40 minutes. When it was finished, the miner slept under the influence of laudanum, his breathing steady, his wounds clean and sutured. Clara helped bandage the patient, while Dr. Morrison washed his instruments. "You'd make a fair frontier nurse," he said. "Ever consider it?" Clara shook her head. "I'm bound for Laramie. To be married. Arranged match? Practical match." She pulled on her coat, feeling its familiar weight settle on her shoulders. "James Garrett owns good land. Needs a wife who can manage a household. I need—" She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound pathetic. "A place to be useful." Dr. Morrison dried his hands on a clean towel. "Useful is good. But useful without affection gets mighty cold, especially in country like Wyoming." Clara buttoned her coat to the throat. "Then it's fortunate I have a warm coat." Outside, the storm had found new strength. Clara made her way back to Kowalski's store, her boots slipping on ice that had formed under the fresh snow. The coat kept the wind at bay. But Dr. Morrison's words followed her through the white darkness. Useful without affection gets mighty cold. At the store, she found Mary packing the last of her bandage supplies into a crate. How is he? He'll live. The doctor says I'd make a good nurse. Mary smiled. And what do you say? Clara hung her coat by the stove and picked up her tablet, returning to the inventory she'd abandoned hours ago. I say I'm bound for Laramie to marry a man with 300 acres and clear title. That's not what I asked. The brass button at the coat's throat caught the lamplight as it swayed on its peg. Clara counted bolts of wool and tried not to think about steady hands or the warm weight of useful work. Outside, the storm howled like a living thing, and somewhere beyond the white wall, James Garrett waited with $40 and a house ready for occupancy. But for the first time since she'd signed the marriage papers, Clara wondered if practical was enough to build a life on, and whether the coat that had kept one woman warm through Wyoming winters could do the same for another. The storm broke at sunset like a fever finally passing. Clara stood at Kowalski's window, watching golden light slant through clearing air to illuminate a world transformed. Snow had sculpted Main Street into something magical. Drifts curved like frozen waves around the buildings, and every post and rail wore a crown of white. Beautiful, Mary said, joining her at the window, and expensive. Clara touched the marriage certificate in her pocket. Another night at the boarding house, another fare I can't afford. Stay with us. Mary's offer came quick and quiet. Stefan's hauling freight to Cheyenne next week. You could ride along for what it costs to feed the horses. Clara turned from the window, surprised by the kindness. In her brother's house, every favor had come with conditions, every courtesy with a price. I couldn't impose. No imposition. We have room, and you've earned your keep twice over today. Mary nodded toward the neat stacks of inventory Clara had counted and organized. Besides, Stefan likes company on the road. Gets lonesome talking to horses all the time. The offer settled around Clara like her coat warm, protective, unexpectedly generous. She found herself thinking of Dr. Morrison's words about useful without affection, and wondered if she'd been looking for the wrong things in the wrong places. That's very kind, Clara said. But I should wire James. Let him know about the delay. Wire will wait until morning. Tonight, come home with me. Meet Stefan. See how people live when they choose each other, instead of just needing each other. Clara looked at her coat hanging by the stove. The brass buttons seemed to wink in the lamplight, as if they approved of Mary's offer. She thought about the boarding house room with its narrow bed and thin walls, about counting pennies and measuring days until her money ran out. All right, she said. Thank you. Mary smiled and began closing the store, checking the cash drawer and banking the fire. Clara helped with the familiar rituals, surprised by how natural it felt to work alongside someone who asked for help instead of demanding it, who offered kindness without keeping score. As they prepared to leave, Mary paused beside Clara's coat. That belonged to Helen Morrison, the doctor's wife. She died 2 winters ago. Consumption. He sold her things rather than keep them as reminders. Clara stared at the coat with new eyes. The doctor didn't recognize it? Men don't notice clothes the way women do. But Helen wore that coat every winter for 5 years. She was a good woman, helped birth half the children in this town, nursed the sick, never turned away anyone who needed care. The brass buttons seemed heavier now, weighted with history. Clara lifted the coat from its peg and slipped it on, feeling the wool settle around her like an embrace from the past. Helen Morrison had worn this coat while tending the sick, had pulled it close while walking through storms to help deliver babies, had buttoned it against the wind while making house calls with her husband. She sounds like someone worth knowing, Clara said. She was. And that coat chose well when it chose you. They stepped into the clear, cold evening. The storm had left the world hushed and gleaming, every surface touched with silver in the dying light. Clara pulled the coat closer and followed Mary toward home, feeling for the first time since leaving her brother's house that she might be walking toward belonging rather than just shelter. The marriage certificate rustled in her pocket, but its weight felt different now, less like a chain binding her to an unknown future, more like a choice she could still make or unmake. James Garrett's $40 and 300 acres waited beyond the storm, but so did other possibilities, other ways of being useful and wanted. As they walked through the snow-hushed streets of Millfield, Clara began to understand that Helen Morrison's coat had brought her more than warmth. It had brought her a glimpse of what life could look like when built on affection as well as need, on choice as well as necessity. Stefan Kowalski stood 6 feet tall in his stocking feet, with hands like split oak and a smile that transformed his weathered face. He greeted Clara at the door of their small house behind the store as if she were family returning from a long journey. The teacher who helps count inventory and assists with surgery, he said in accented English, taking her coat with careful reverence. Mary tells me you are very capable. I try to be useful. Useful is good. But Mary, she is more than useful, she is necessary. There is difference. Stefan hung Clara's coat on a peg beside the kitchen stove, next to his own heavy work jacket. You stay long as you need. We have room, we have food, we have, how you say, good conversation. The house smelled of bread and coffee and the lingering sweetness of applewood smoke. Mary moved between stove and table with easy efficiency, preparing a meal that seemed designed to chase away the memory of cold and storm. Clara found herself seated at a table set with real china, not fancy, but cared for, each piece part of a set that spoke of permanence and intention. So, Stefan said, as Mary served thick slices of bread and butter, you go to Laramie to marry? Clara nodded, her fingers finding the marriage certificate in her skirt pocket. A practical arrangement. He needs a wife who can manage a household. I need, she paused, the familiar words feeling stale in this warm kitchen. Security. Mary finished gently. Yes, security. Stefan considered this while spreading butter on his bread. I come from Poland for security. Good land, no kings, no soldiers taking what little we have. But when I find Mary, then I learn security and happiness. They are not same thing. Tell her how we met, Mary said, her eyes bright with remembered joy. Stefan's smile deepened. She is working in hotel kitchen in San Francisco. I am hauling freight from docks to railroad. Every day I bring supplies to hotel. Every day I find excuse to visit kitchen. This flour, it seems heavy. Maybe you need help carrying. These eggs, they look delicate. Perhaps I should check they are not broken. He laughed. Mary, she knows I am making foolish excuses, but she lets me help anyway. He courted me with excuses and excellent grammar, Mary said. His English was much better than he pretended. I wanted to stay longer, hear her laugh more. Stefan reached across the table to squeeze his wife's hand. Security brought me to America. Mary brought me home. Clara felt something twist in her chest, not envy, exactly, but a sharp awareness of what she'd never looked for, never thought to want. James Garrett's letters had been businesslike, practical, focused on acres and improvements and the need for capable help. He'd never mentioned laughter or finding home in another person's presence. You're James, Mary said carefully. What does he say about you? In his letters? Clara withdrew the marriage certificate. He says I seem qualified. That Pastor Webb spoke well of my character and abilities. And what do you say about him? The question hung in the warm air like a challenge. Clara found herself thinking of Helen Morrison's coat hanging beside Stefan's jacket. Two garments that belong together through choice rather than necessity. I say he owns good land and needs a capable wife. Stefan shook his head. This is not answer. This is how you say inventory list. The word hit Clara like a physical blow. All her careful reasoning, all her practical plans, reduced to counting assets like bolts of cloth in a stockroom. She looked around the Kowalski kitchen at the mismatched chairs that somehow suited each other perfectly, at the photographs on the wall showing Stefan and Mary's wedding day, at the small touches that spoke of two lives deliberately intertwined. Maybe inventory is all I know, she said quietly. Number, Mary's voice was firm. I watched you today. The way you helped Dr. Morrison, that wasn't inventory thinking, that was care thinking. Heart thinking. Heart thinking doesn't pay rent or buy food. Neither does marriage without it, Stefan said. Marriage for security, only that is business partnership. Business partnerships, they can dissolve when conditions change. Marriage, it must be strong enough for storms. Wind rattled the windows again, promising another day's delay. Clara thought of James Garrett waiting in Laramie, of the $40 growing smaller with each passing hour, of the practical future she'd mapped out in careful detail. But she also thought of Helen Morrison's coat and the life it represented, a woman who'd worn it while caring for others, who'd found purpose beyond mere survival, who'd been mourned by a husband who sold her belongings not from lack of love, but from too much of it. "I should wire James in the morning," Clara said. "Let him know about the delay." "Yes," Mary agreed. "And maybe ask him something more than business questions. Ask him what makes him laugh, what he dreams about besides good harvests and clear titles. What if he doesn't have an answer?" Stefan squeezed his wife's hand again, a gesture so natural it seemed unconscious. "Then you have different problem than delay." Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, promising another day of whiteout conditions, another night of counting costs and considering choices. But inside the Kowalski kitchen, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the warmth that came from being welcomed rather than merely tolerated, from being seen as more than just a useful pair of hands. Helen Morrison's coat hung by the stove like a patient friend, its brass buttons catching the lamplight. Clara wondered what the coat would choose if it could speak, what wisdom it might offer from its years of witnessing love and loss, duty and devotion. The storm raged on, and Clara prepared to discover whether her practical plans could weather the tempest or whether she'd need to find different shelter entirely. The depot bell struck 9 times through the crystal-clear morning air. Clara stood on the platform beside Stefan's loaded wagon, her coat buttoned against the sharp cold, watching Otto Brennan check his pocket watch with the precision of a man whose life revolved around schedules. "Stage should be here within the hour," Otto announced. "Road crews worked all night clearing the pass. You'll be in Cheyenne by evening, Laramie by tomorrow, noon." Clara nodded and fingered the telegram in her coat pocket. James Garrett's reply to her wire, received an hour ago. "House ready, stop. Weather improving, stop." 34 words that told her nothing about laughter or dreams, everything about practical expectations and the patience of a man accustomed to waiting for useful things to arrive on schedule. "You sure about this?" Stefan asked quietly. He'd been loading freight since dawn, preparing for his own journey to Cheyenne, but his eyes held concern that had nothing to do with cargo or schedules. "I signed papers," Clara said. "Gave my word. Papers can be unsigned. Words can be unsaid." Stefan secured a canvas tarp over his load with practiced efficiency. "But chances, good chances, they don't come back once you let them pass." "Doctor," Morrison approached from the direction of his office, his black bag in hand, and his face drawn with the exhaustion that came from a night spent monitoring patients. The injured miner had developed fever, and the doctor had barely left his side. "Miss Hennessy," he called. "Might I have a word?" Clara walked to meet him, aware of Stefan and Otto listening, aware of the stage road stretching away toward choices that couldn't be unmade. The coat's weight settled on her shoulders like Helen Morrison's hands, steady and warm and somehow encouraging. "How is your patient?" "Better. The fever broke an hour ago." Dr. Morrison studied her face with the careful attention he usually reserved for symptoms. "I wanted to thank you again for your help yesterday, and to make an offer." Clara felt her pulse quicken. "Doctor? I need an assistant. Someone with steady hands and a clear head. Someone who can follow instructions without panic and think independently when necessary." He paused, watching her face. "The pay isn't much, $30 a month plus room and board, but the work is meaningful. You'd be saving lives, not just managing households. $30 a month. More than she'd earned teaching school, enough to live independently. Enough to choose her own future instead of having it chosen for her." Clara looked toward the stage road, then back at Dr. Morrison's tired, hopeful face. "What about your wife's things? Her clothes, Helen would want them used, not stored." Dr. Morrison's smile was gentle but firm. "That coat looks like it was made for someone who tends to others. Seems a shame to waste it on someone who's only tending to one man's comfort. I've given my word to James Garrett. Then ask him to release it." The stage appeared on the horizon, a dark speck moving steadily through the white landscape. Clara watched it approach and felt time compressing, choices narrowing to a single moment that would define everything that followed. James Garrett waited in Laramie with his 300 acres and his practical needs. Dr. Morrison waited in Millfield with meaningful work and Helen's coat hanging ready in a warm kitchen. "I can't," Clara said finally. "I signed papers, took his money for passage. A woman's word should mean something." Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. "It should, but so should a woman's happiness." The stage rolled into Millfield with a thunder of hooves and jingle of harness, bringing the smell of leather and horse sweat and the promise of departure. The driver called greetings to Otto, began checking his team with the efficiency of a man eager to make up lost time. "All aboard for Cheyenne and points west," he shouted. "We're running 2 hours behind and aim to make it up." Clara shouldered her small traveling bag and started toward the stage, her feet moving automatically while her mind reeled with possibility and regret. $30 a month and meaningful work versus marriage to a stranger and security bought with someone else's loneliness. "Clara, wait." Mary Kowalski appeared at her elbow, breathing hard as if she'd been running. "Stefan told me about Dr. Morrison's offer. I can't take it. I've committed to James Garrett." "Then uncommit." Mary's voice was fierce with friendship and frustration. "Write him a letter, send back his money, choose your own life instead of letting someone else choose it for you." The stage driver checked his watch and looked impatiently toward the depot. Other passengers were boarding a traveling salesman with his sample cases, a young mother with 2 children, an elderly rancher heading home after business in the territorial capital. People with destinations, with certainty, with lives that moved forward according to plan. Clara reached into her coat pocket and withdrew James Garrett's telegram, reading it once more in the clear morning light. House, ready, stop. Such simple words, but they spoke of a life reduced to basic functions, to shelter and sustenance, and the grinding practicality of survival rather than flourishing. She thought of Helen Morrison wearing this coat while delivering babies, while nursing the sick, while building a life that mattered beyond mere existence. She thought of Stefan and Mary choosing each other for love as well as security, creating warmth that had nothing to do with coal stoves or thick walls. "Miss, you coming or not?" the stage driver called. "We've got a schedule to keep." Clara looked at the stage, then at Mary's hopeful face, then at Dr. Morrison waiting quietly beside his office door. The coat seemed to tighten around her shoulders, as if Helen Morrison herself were offering one last embrace, one final encouragement to choose courage over caution. "I'm coming," Clara called to the driver. She stepped toward the stage, then stopped. But not today. She turned back toward the depot, toward Dr. Morrison's surprised smile, toward Mary's delighted laugh. The coat felt lighter now, as if it had shed the weight of other people's expectations and found its true purpose. "I'll need to wire James," Clara said. "Send back his money, explain my change of plans." "You sure?" Dr. Morrison asked. Clara looked around at the faces of people who'd welcomed her as more than just a useful pair of hands, who'd shown her what life could look like when built on affection as well as need. "I'm sure. This is where I belong." The stage rolled away toward Cheyenne without her, carrying other passengers toward their chosen destinations. Clara watched it disappear around the bend, then turned toward Dr. Morrison's office and her new life as a frontier nurse, wearing Helen Morrison's coat with pride and purpose. Behind her, the depot bell struck 10 times, marking not an ending but a beginning, the start of a life chosen rather than simply endured, warmed by more than wool and heated by something deeper than practical fire. 6 months later, Clara stood in Dr. Morrison's office, adjusting the brass buttons on Helen's coat, her coat, now while preparing for another house call. The injured miner had recovered completely and named his first daughter Clara in her honor. Mrs. Chen's grandson had survived scarlet fever thanks to Clara's careful nursing. 3 babies had come into the world with Clara's steady hands, helping them take their first breath. A letter from James Garrett lay open on the desk, his second since she'd wired her decision. He'd married a widow from Cheyenne, he wrote, someone practical and capable who didn't mind that he talked more to his horses than his wife. He wished Clara well and thanked her for her honesty in setting him free to find someone better suited to his needs. "Ready?" Dr. Morrison asked, shouldering his own bag. "Always." Clara picked up her medical kit, a gift from Mary and Stefan, and followed him toward the door. Where are we going? New family out past Broken Creek. Woman's expecting twins, and they want skilled help on hand. Dr. Morrison smiled. She specifically asked for the nurse in Helen's coat. Clara looked down at the blue wool that had carried her through her first Wyoming winter, through the storm that changed everything, through the choice that led her home. The brass buttons caught the morning light like small promises kept. Then we'd better not keep her waiting, Clara said. They stepped into the clear spring morning where snow still crowned the distant peaks, but green grass had begun pushing through the brown earth around Millfield. Clara pulled the coat close, feeling the weight of work that mattered, of belonging earned rather than arranged, of a future built on more than mere survival. The coat had waited through one woman's death and another woman's doubt, had held fast through storms and choices and the long journey from security to something deeper. Now it would witness new life coming into the world, carried by hands that had learned the difference between being needed and being valued, between shelter and home. Clara climbed into the buggy beside Dr. Morrison and settled her coat around her like the embrace of an old friend. Somewhere beyond the mountains, James Garrett was probably checking his livestock and planning his spring planting with his new wife. Somewhere behind them, Mary was opening the store and Stefan was loading freight for another journey. But here, in this moment, Clara was exactly where she belonged, wearing a coat that had chosen its purpose well, carrying skills that saved lives rather than simply managing them, heading toward people who needed her steady hands and clear thinking more than they needed her compliance or gratitude. The brass buttons winked in the morning sun as the buggy rolled toward Broken Creek, carrying Clara toward whatever came next, with the confidence of a woman who had learned to choose her own storms and weather them in good company. If you'd like more stories like this, stay a while. I'll tell the next one tomorrow night.